I woke up on Thanksgiving to an empty house. Just a note on the counter saying they had left for a family trip I would not enjoy. By the time I realized they had flown first class to Santorini without me, I also realized almost everything in that house was legally mine. They thought they had cut me out, unaware I had spent years funding their perfect life right up until the moment I decided to take it all back. My name is Harper Lane. I am 29 years old, and I have spent the last 5 years of my life convinced that if I just gave enough, worked hard enough, and paid for enough, I would eventually earn my place at the table. I was wrong. I woke up on Thanksgiving morning to a silence so heavy it felt physical, pressing down on my chest like a lead blanket. In the suburbs of Denver, especially in our house, Thanksgiving was never quiet. By 7 in the morning, the air should have been thick with the smell of roasting onions and sage. The television in the living room should have been blasting the parade. The volume turned up too high because my father, Gary, claimed he liked to hear the marching bands from the kitchen. My mother, Linda, should have been shouting instructions about peeling potatoes or checking the silver, and my younger sister, Bella, should have been complaining loudly about being woken up before noon on a holiday. Instead, there was nothing. No footsteps overhead, no clatter of pans, no low hum of the furnace kicking on, just a hollow, ringing silence that made the hair on my arms stand up. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling fan that I had paid to have installed 2 summers ago. My first instinct was not fear. It was a nagging sense of displacement, the feeling you get when you walk into a room and realize a picture frame has been moved a fraction of an inch. Something was wrong. This house was never this quiet. Not unless no one was home. But that was impossible. It was Thanksgiving. We had a 14-pound turkey thawing in the refrigerator. We had guests coming, or so I thought. I threw the covers off and stepped onto the hardwood floor. The coldness of the wood bit into my bare feet. I pulled on a robe, tying the sash tight around my waist, and opened my bedroom door. "Mom!" I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the hallway, bouncing off the walls. "Dad?" No answer. I walked to the top of the stairs. The hallway was empty. Bella's door was closed, which was normal for her, but usually, I could hear the faint thumping bass of her music or the sound of her talking on the phone. Today, the door looked like a wall, impenetrable and silent. As I descended the stairs, I started constructing rationalizations in my head. It was a defense mechanism I had perfected over the years. Maybe they ran out to the grocery store for emergency supplies. Dad always forgot the cranberry sauce, no matter how many times Mom wrote it on the list. Maybe they went to pick up Aunt Carol from the airport early, even though her flight wasn't due until 2 in the afternoon. Maybe they went to early mass, although none of us had set foot in a church in 3 years. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned into the living room. I stopped dead. The room was immaculate. Our living room was lived in. It was usually a landscape of discarded magazines, half-folded throw blankets, and coffee mugs left on coasters. But this morning, it looked like a model home in a real estate brochure. The throw pillows on the gray sectional were chopped and fluffed, sitting at perfect angles. The coffee table was completely bare, wiped free of dust and fingerprints. The curtains were drawn exactly halfway on every window. There was a smell in the air, sharp and chemical, bleach, lemon-scented disinfectant. My mother never cleaned before Thanksgiving dinner. She always said there was no point in scrubbing the floors when 20 people were about to track snow and gravy through the house. She cleaned the day after, but the scent of bleach was undeniable, hanging stale in the cool air. Someone had scrubbed this house, and they had done it recently, likely in the middle of the night while I was sleeping. A knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach. I walked through the living room, my fingers trailing over the back of the sofa I had bought for them last Christmas, because Mom said the old one hurt her back. The fabric was cold. I moved toward the door that led to the garage. I needed to see the cars. If the cars were there, then this was just a weird prank or a misunderstanding. I opened the heavy fire door and flipped the light switch. The garage was empty. The concrete floor stared back at me, vast and gray. My father's Ford pickup truck was gone. My mother's burgundy SUV was gone. The space where they usually parked was marked only by a dry, dark stain of oil on the cement. It wasn't just that they had taken one car to the store, they had taken both vehicles. Why would they take two cars to get cranberry sauce? I closed the garage door, my hand trembling slightly on the knob. I turned back to the mudroom area by the back entrance. This was the catch-all zone for the Lane family. It was usually overflowing with coats, boots, scarves, and umbrellas. I looked at the hooks on the wall. My winter coat hung there, solitary and gray. My work bag was on the bench, but my father's heavy parka was gone. My mother's wool trench coat was gone. Bella's fashionable puffer jacket, the one she had begged me to buy her last month because it was trending on social media, was gone. I looked down at the shoe rack. The sturdy walking shoes my parents wore whenever they traveled were missing. The knot in my stomach uncoiled into a wave of nausea. They hadn't gone to the store. You don't wear travel shoes and take two cars to go to the store. You don't scrub the house with bleach before a grocery run. I walked into the kitchen. This was supposed to be the center of the chaos today. This was where I was supposed to spend the next 8 hours peeling, chopping, basting, and washing dishes while my family entertained guests in the other room. The kitchen was pristine, the granite countertops, which I had paid to have resealed last spring, gleamed under the recessed lighting. The sink was empty and dry. There was no turkey sitting out to bring to room temperature. There were no bags of stuffing mix, no cans of pumpkin puree, no handwritten timeline of oven temperatures taped to the microwave. It was as if Thanksgiving had been canceled, erased from the calendar entirely. My eyes scanned the room, desperate for a clue, for anything that made sense, and then I saw it. On the stainless steel refrigerator, the one I had purchased 3 years ago when their old one died 2 days before Christmas, there was a single piece of lined notebook paper. It was held in place by a small magnet shaped like a maple leaf. I walked over to it. The house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator compressor kicking on. I reached out and pulled the paper free. It was my mother's handwriting, scrawled, hasty, looping letters that I had spent my life trying to decipher. Harper. We flew to Santorini, family trip. You would not enjoy the long flight. Back in 9 days. Mom. I read it once, then I read it again. The words did not seem to make sense together. Santorini, Greece, a place my mother had talked about visiting for 20 years but always claimed was too expensive. Family trip. The phrase hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. It's a family trip. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding the piece of paper, and I did the math. Family trip, Dad, Mom, Bella, 3 people. I was the 4th person in this house. I was the oldest daughter. I was the one who made sure the bills were paid on time. I was the one who drove them to appointments. But in the equation of this vacation, in the definition of family my mother had used, I was not a variable. I was a remainder. You would not enjoy the long flight. It was such a flimsy, transparent excuse. I had flown to London for work last year. I had flown to New York. I did not mind flying. What she meant was, we did not want you there. I looked around the kitchen again, but this time, the shock was beginning to recede, replaced by something colder, sharper. I looked at the Bosch dishwasher I had bought them when the old one flooded the kitchen floor. I looked at the high-end espresso machine on the counter that Bella insisted they needed, which I had paid for with my bonus check. I looked at the custom blinds on the window above the sink. They had left me, on Thanksgiving, without a word of warning. I imagined them planning this. You do not go to Santorini on a whim. You do not book international flights for 3 people, reserve a villa, and arrange transport overnight. This had been in the works for months. They must have sat at this very table, whispering over travel brochures while I was upstairs working or asleep. They must have discussed dates. Does this week work for Bella? Yes, she is on break. What about Harper? Don't tell Harper. She will just complain. She will bring the mood down. We will just leave a note. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just the leaving. It was the timing. They chose the one day of the year centered around family and gratitude to demonstrate exactly how little I mattered to them. I dropped the note onto the counter. It fluttered slightly before settling. I needed to be sure. A part of my brain, the part that still wanted to be the good daughter, the fixer, was trying to find a loophole. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe they were surprising me. I turned and ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I went straight to Bella's room. I didn't knock. There was no point. I pushed the door open. Bella was messy by nature. Her floor was usually a carpet of clothes, makeup palettes, and half-finished school projects. The room was clean, not spotless like the living room, but organized. Her bed was made. The duvet pulled up tight. I walked over to her closet. The door was open. Her favorite suitcase, a hard-shell pink roller I had bought her for her senior trip, was gone. I started opening drawers. Her bikini drawer was empty. Her summer clothes, shorts, tank tops, sundresses, were gone. I went to her vanity, her expensive skincare products, her travel hairdryer, her makeup bag, all gone. I walked into her bathroom. The toothbrush holder was empty. They hadn't just left. They had packed systematically. They had taken everything they needed for 9 days of luxury. I went to my parents' room next. It was the same story. The closet gaped open, missing the suits my father wore for nice dinners and the flowing dresses my mother favored for vacations. On the bedside table, usually cluttered with reading glasses and tissue boxes, there was nothing but a layer of dust. But then I saw something in the trash can by my father's side of the bed. It was a crumpled piece of paper. I reached down and fished it out, smoothing it flat against my thigh. It was a printed itinerary. Santorini Luxury Escape, 3 guests, business class. The date on the booking was from 4 months ago. 4 months. They had planned this in July. I sat down on the edge of my parents' bed. The mattress felt too soft, swallowing me up. I stared at the itinerary. 4 months ago, I had paid for the repair of the transmission in my father's truck. That was $2,000, 4 months ago. I had covered the property insurance premium because Mom said things were a little tight this quarter. Things weren't tight. They were saving for business class tickets to Greece. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, like a rib cracking. It wasn't heartbreak. I think I had been heartbroken by my family a long time ago, in small, manageable doses. This was different. This was the sensation of a veil being ripped away. I thought about last night. I had come home from work late, around 7. Mom was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. She had looked at me, smiled a tight, strange smile, and said, "You look tired. Harper, you should sleep in tomorrow. Don't set an alarm. We can handle the morning prep." I had thought she was being kind. I had thought, for the first time in years, she was trying to take care of me. She wasn't taking care of me. She was ensuring I wouldn't wake up while they were loading the suitcases into the car. She was ensuring I wouldn't come downstairs at 4 in the morning to get a glass of water and catch them escaping. We can handle the morning prep. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I stood up and walked out of their room. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I walked back down the stairs, my hands sliding along the banister. The house was so quiet. 9 days. They would be gone for 9 days. I went back to the kitchen. The note was still there on the counter. Back in 9 days. It was an instruction. Sit here. Wait. Keep the pipes from freezing. Feed the goldfish if we have any. Be here when we get back, so we can show you the photos and tell you how beautiful the sunset was and how much we missed you. But oh, you really wouldn't have liked the food. It was too exotic for you. They expected me to be here. They expected me to be Harper the reliable, Harper the doormat, Harper the bank. They expected me to be hurt. Sure. They probably expected me to cry. They probably had a bet on how many angry text messages I would send them by noon. But they expected me to stay. I looked at the refrigerator again. I looked at the coffee maker. I looked at the expensive mixer in the corner. I pulled out my phone. It was 10 in the morning. The screen was blank. No happy Thanksgiving text from Mom. No sorry we left you text from Bella. Just silence. I unlocked my phone and opened my banking app. I scrolled through the transaction history, the grocery bills, the utility bills, the transfer to my dad for car repairs. The payment to the roofer last month. I looked at the total balance in my savings account. It was healthy, but it should have been double that. It would have been double that if I hadn't spent the last decade trying to buy the affection of 3 people who had just flown across the Atlantic to get away from me. The shock was fully gone now. In its place was a clarity so sharp it almost hurt my eyes. They hadn't just forgotten me. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had made a choice. They had looked at the budget, looked at the seats on the plane, looked at the family dynamic, and decided that I was surplus to requirements. I was the infrastructure of this family, not a member of it. I was the foundation they walked on, not the people living inside. I picked up the note one last time. I ran my thumb over the signature. Mom. It wasn't an apology. It was a dismissal. I looked around the kitchen. It was a nice kitchen. It had high ceilings and good light. It was full of things I had purchased. It was inside a house that, technically, legally, I had a significant stake in, a fact they seemed to have conveniently forgotten along with my invitation to Greece. If they can leave this easily, I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady and low, then perhaps I can too. The silence of the house didn't seem oppressive anymore. It seemed like an opportunity. It seemed like a blank canvas. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked over to the sink, filled a glass with water, and drank it down in one long swallow. Then I set the glass down with a deliberate click. They wanted a vacation from me? Fine. They were about to get a much longer one than they bargained for, and when they came back, they weren't going to find the dutiful daughter waiting to hear about their trip. They were going to find out exactly what happens when you remove the foundation from a house. I turned away from the counter, leaving the note where it lay, and walked toward the living room. It was time to stop wondering why they left, and start figuring out exactly what I was going to take with me when I went. Standing in that silent, bleach-scented kitchen, the ghost of my grandmother's voice drifted back to me from a summer in Kansas nearly 2 decades ago. I was 10 years old, sitting on her back porch while she snapped green beans into a metal bowl. She had looked at me over the rim of her glasses, her eyes sharp and blue, and whispered something I did not understand at the time. She said, "Do not let people shrink you. Harper, you are not a sweater in the dryer." I had laughed because I thought it was a funny image, me turning into a tiny wool sweater. I did not realize she was giving me a warning. I did not realize she had already seen the pattern starting to form. The way my parents were slowly, methodically, editing me down to fit into the margins of my sister's life. It started early. This casting of roles, in the theater of the Lane family, Bella was the lead actress, the star around whom the entire production revolved. I was the stage manager. I was the one in black clothing moving the props in the dark, essential for the show to go on, but never meant to be seen by the audience. When I was in middle school, I brought home a report card with straight A's and a second-place ribbon from the district science fair. My father, Gary, had patted me on the shoulder, a heavy, distracted pat, and said, "Good work. Harper, you are so solid. We never have to worry about you." 10 minutes later, Bella, who was 7 at the time, ran into the room wearing a construction paper crown she had made in art class. My mother, Linda, gasped as if she were witnessing the coronation of a real queen. They spent the next hour taking photos of her, making her pose on the fireplace hearth, while my ribbon was left on the kitchen counter, eventually getting pushed into a drawer with the takeout menus. Slid. That was my father's favorite word for me. Harper is solid, he would tell his friends at barbecues. She is practical. He meant it as a compliment. Or at least that is what I told myself. But he never called me brilliant. He never called me exceptional. Those words were reserved for Bella. Bella was spirited. Bella was creative. Bella was destined for great things. I remember my 16th birthday with a clarity that stings. I had asked for a small dinner party, just family. I wanted to make the meal myself because I had been watching cooking shows and wanted to try a complicated lasagna recipe. I spent 6 hours in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, simmering sauce, layering the noodles just right. My feet ached, but I felt proud. When we finally sat down to eat, my parents handed out the gifts. I got a calculator, a graphing calculator for my advanced math class, and a sweater. Then, my mother pulled out a large, wrapped box from under her chair. "We saw this and just could not resist," she said, her eyes shining. She handed the box to Bella. It wasn't Bella's birthday, it was mine. But Bella tore open the paper to reveal a professional-grade karaoke microphone and stand. "So you can practice for the talent show," my mother squealed. Bella screamed with delight, set it up immediately, and spent the rest of my birthday dinner singing loudly over our conversation. My parents watched her, mesmerized, their food going cold. I ate my lasagna in silence. When I started to clear the plates, my father looked at me and said, "This was good fuel. Harper, very filling." Fuel. That is what I was. I provided the energy so they could shine. By the time I reached college, the conditioning was complete. I wanted to study interior design. I loved the idea of creating spaces, of making a home feel like a sanctuary. I had a sketchbook full of floor plans and color palettes. When I showed them to my mother, she frowned, the way one frowns at a child who says they want to be an astronaut. "Design is so risky." "Honey," she said, putting a hand on my arm, "you are so good with numbers. You are so organized. Why not accounting? Or finance? It is stable. It is safe. Think about how much you could help the family later if you really understood money." Help the family. That was the hook. I loved them. I wanted to be useful. So I put away my sketchbooks and enrolled in the business school. I spent 4 years studying tax law and corporate finance, dulling my creativity until it fit into a spreadsheet. I graduated with honors. Of course, I was solid. After graduation, I received a job offer from a firm in Chicago. It was a great starting salary, a chance to live in a new city, a chance to start over where no one knew me as Bella's responsible big sister. I was packing my boxes when my mother came into my room, sitting on the edge of my bed with tears in her eyes. "I just don't know what we will do without you," she sniffled. "Dad's back has been acting up, and Bella is going through such a hard time with her drama classes. If you are all the way in Chicago, who will help us if something happens? Denver has plenty of jobs. Stay here. Stay close to home. For us." So I stayed. I took a job at Northline Data and Compliance, a 20-minute drive from their house. I moved into an apartment nearby, but I was at their house 3 or 4 nights a week. Slowly, insidiously, the boundaries between my life and theirs began to erode. It started with small things. "Harper, can you figure out why the internet bill is so high? You understand these things." I called the company, negotiated a lower rate, and my mother said, "Why don't we just put the account in your name? You are so much better at managing the dates. We will pay you back." Then it was the electricity, because my father kept forgetting to mail the check, then the water, then the streaming services. Within 2 years, every utility in the house was running through my bank account. They paid me back sporadically, usually in round numbers that never quite covered the total, accompanied by a casual, "We will settle up next month." We never did. I remember when I was 25, I planned a trip to Italy with 2 of my college friends. We had been saving for a year. I was going to see Rome, Florence, Venice. I bought a guidebook and marked it up with sticky notes. 2 weeks before we were supposed to book the flights, I mentioned it at dinner. The table went silent. Bella poked at her salad, looking tragic. My mother sighed, a long, rattling sound. "Italy," Mom said. "Wow, must be nice." "It will be," I said, trying to keep the excitement in my voice. "It is just that Bella has been dying to go to Europe," Mom said, looking at my sister. "She has been working so hard on her portfolio. It seems a little cruel, doesn't it? For you to go off gallivanting with your friends while your sister is stuck here? It would break her heart. Harper, she would feel so left behind." "I can't take her with me, Mom. It is a girls' trip." "I am not saying take her," Mom said, her voice hardening. "I am saying maybe you wait. Wait until we can all go as a family. Wouldn't that be better? To share that experience?" They made me feel so selfish. so greedy for wanting something for myself, that I canceled. I lost my deposit. My friends went without me, and I spent that week driving Bella to her voice lessons. Thanksgiving became the microcosm of my existence. For the last 7 years, the holiday followed the exact same script. I would arrive at their house at 8 in the morning. I would prep the turkey. I would peel 5 pounds of potatoes. I would make the stuffing from scratch because Dad didn't like the boxed kind. I would set the table. I would pour the wine. While I was covered in flour and grease, sweating over a hot oven, my parents and Bella would be in the living room. They would be dressed in coordinating outfits. They would take selfies. They would post them on Facebook and Instagram with captions like, "So grateful for family" and "blessed." If you looked closely at those photos, you might see a blur in the background, an elbow, a blur of hair. That was me, rushing to refill a glass or check the timer. I was the staff. I was the help. I never complained. I told myself this was love. Love was service. Love was sacrifice. If I made their lives perfect, eventually they would look at me and see me. But the cracks in my denial started to form 2 years ago. I was in the dining room, setting out the dessert plates. My parents were in the kitchen, unaware I was just around the corner. They were talking in hushed voices. "We really need to fix the roof this year, Gary," my mother said. "The leak in the guest room is getting worse." "I know, Linda. But the money. Bella needs new headshots, and she wants to go to that acting workshop in LA. That is $3,000 right there." "Well," my mother said, her voice casual, "ask Harper to cover the roof. Tell her it is an investment in the property value. She will do it. She is stable. She will always be here. Bella is the one who needs the investment. She is the one who is going to be a star." I stood there, holding a stack of china plates, feeling a coldness spread through my chest. Harper will always be here. I wasn't a person with dreams or needs. I was a fixture. I was a safety net. Bella was the investment. I was the maintenance cost. That was the moment the knife went in. But I didn't pull it out. I pushed it deeper. I paid for the roof. I signed the contract. I told myself that being needed was the same thing as being loved. The climax of my stupidity came when I was 27. My father sat me down, looking gray and anxious. He told me they had had a tough few months with investments. He told me the credit card debt had gotten out of control. The interest rates were drowning them. He cried. It was the first time I had ever seen him cry. "We just need a bridge, Harper," he said, gripping my hand. "Just until the end of the year." I drained my emergency fund. I transferred $18,000 to their joint account. I paid off their cards. I saved their credit scores. They thanked me, of course. They hugged me. They said I was a lifesaver. But the repayment plan we discussed never happened. A month later, Bella came home with a new designer handbag. When I asked about it, Mom said, "Oh, it was a gift from her aunt." I knew it wasn't. I knew they were back to spending, secure in the knowledge that their solid daughter had wiped the slate clean. All of this, the skipped trips, the paid bills, the silent labor, the $18,000, it all accumulated in my mind like sediment in a pipe, slowly choking off the flow of affection I had for them. I just hadn't realized the pipe was blocked until today. I stood in the empty kitchen, looking at the stainless steel appliances I had bought. The realization washed over me, cold and clarifying. Leaving me behind on Thanksgiving wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a chaotic oversight. It was the logical conclusion of our entire relationship. You don't take the appliance repairman to Santorini. You don't take the bank teller to a luxury villa. You leave them behind to keep the machinery running. I was their resource. I was an unconditional well of money and labor, and they had drawn from me so often and so deeply that they had stopped seeing me as a source to be protected and started seeing me as a utility to be used. They assumed I would be here when they got back. They assumed I would be hurt. Sure, but that I would get over it. Just like I got over the Italy trip. Just like I got over the 16th birthday. They assumed I would still be solid. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. Not from sadness, but from rage. a pure, white-hot rage that felt terrifyingly good. For 29 years, I had tried to be the daughter they wanted. I had tried to buy my way into their hearts. I had thought that if I just paid one more bill, fixed one more crisis, stayed quiet one more time, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Bella. But they never would. To them, I wasn't a daughter, I was a logistics solution. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the bleach they had used to scrub away their guilt. "If I am just a tool," I said aloud to the empty room, my voice sounding strange and flat, "then it is time to see exactly how the house functions when the tool is gone." I wasn't going to cry. I was done crying. Crying was for people who hoped things would change. I knew now that they wouldn't. I was going to do something much more practical. I was going to do exactly what they always praised me for. I was going to manage the assets. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. I placed the note from my mother in the center of the placemat. Then I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim light of the kitchen. I wasn't Harper the daughter anymore. I was Harper the accountant. And I was about to close the books on the Lane family. "Let's see," I whispered, opening a blank spreadsheet. "If I am only useful, let's calculate the exact value of that utility." The cursor blinked, waiting for my command. The sadness was gone, replaced by the cold, hard precision of numbers. They wanted a transaction? I would give them the most expensive transaction of their lives. I pushed the laptop aside. Though I did not close it, the spreadsheet was open, a blank grid waiting for data. But I needed raw materials before I could start filling in the cells. I stood up from the kitchen table, the legs of the chair scraping harshly against the tile floor. The sound echoed in the empty house, a stark reminder that I was alone. For the first time in my life, I did not walk through this house as a daughter, or a sister, or even a resident. I walked through it like a forensic accountant entering a crime scene. I walked through it like an auditor who had just been tipped off about embezzlement. I started upstairs, returning to the scene of the first anomaly, Bella's room. When I had glanced in earlier, I had been looking for her presence. Now, I was looking for the absence of it. I stepped inside and really looked. The bed was made. It wasn't just made. It was military tight. The corners of the duvet were tucked in with precision. Bella never made her bed. In the 22 years of her life, I could count on one hand the number of times she had pulled the comforter up, and even then, it was usually to hide a stain or a mess underneath. This level of neatness felt staged. It felt like a hotel room waiting for the next guest, or perhaps a room prepared for a long vacancy. I opened her closet again. The gaps where her clothes used to be were like missing teeth. The sundresses were gone. The linen pants were gone. The expensive rompers I had bought her for her last 3 birthdays were gone. What remained were the rejects, the sweaters that had pilled, the jeans that were too tight, the cheap t-shirts she wore to sleep in. I moved to her desk. Usually, it was a disaster zone of makeup sponges and half-empty water bottles. Today, it was cleared off. Except for a small stack of papers shoved under a heavy glass paperweight, I pulled them out. It was an email printout, folded into quarters. I unfolded it, smoothing the crease with my thumb. Santorini itinerary, confirmed. I scanned the details. Private villa, Oya, infinity pool, chef service included for 3 mornings. Then my eyes landed on the passenger list. Travelers, 3 adults. 3. I looked at the date stamp in the corner of the page. August 12th. August, 3 months ago. I felt a cold flush wash over my skin. In August, I had taken Bella out for coffee because she was crying about feeling overwhelmed by her summer acting classes. She had sat across from me, sipping an iced latte I paid for, and told me she felt like she needed a break, just to get away from everything. I had listened. I had sympathized. I had transferred $500 to her account that evening so she could treat herself to a spa day. At the exact same time she was cashing that transfer, she was already booked on a flight to Greece without me. The number 3 on the page seemed to mock me. It wasn't that they had booked for 4 and then canceled me. It wasn't that they had tried to make it work. From the very inception of this plan, from the moment they clicked search flights, the parameter had been set to 3. I was never even a variable in the equation. I dropped the paper back onto the desk and walked out. I went down the hall to the master bedroom. My parents' room smelled of my mother's perfume and dust. I went straight to the bedside table where I had found the itinerary in the trash earlier, but this time I opened the drawer. My father was terrible at organizing financial records, but he was paranoid about losing travel documents, so he usually kept a travel folder. It wasn't there. They had taken it with them, obviously, but tucked in the back of the drawer was a stack of printed receipts and payment schedules. I pulled them out and sat on the edge of the bed. The top page was a payment confirmation for the villa. The deposit was $4,000. The date was September 5th. I froze. September 5th. I closed my eyes, accessing the mental ledger I kept of my own finances. On September 3rd, my father had called me, his voice tight with panic. He said the transmission on the truck was finally dead. He said the mechanic quoted him $4,200. He said he didn't have the liquidity because of a mix-up with his pension check. "I will pay you back as soon as the pension clears. Harper," he had said, "I just need to get to work." I had transferred him $4,500 on September 4th, just to be safe. There was no transmission repair. The truck was gone, likely parked at the airport or a long-term lot, but it hadn't been broken. My money, the money I earned sitting under fluorescent lights analyzing data compliance, had gone directly from my account to a landlord in Santorini. I flipped the page. Business class upgrades, $2,000 per ticket, paid on October 1st. October 1st was the day my mother told me she needed help with a root canal that insurance wouldn't cover. I had written her a check. I flipped through page after page. It was a catalog of theft. There was no other word for it. Every time they had come to me with a crisis in the last 4 months, a medical emergency, a car repair, a sudden increase in insurance premiums, it matched, almost to the dollar, a payment for this trip. They hadn't just saved up for a vacation and excluded me. They had aggressively harvested the money from me to pay for it. They had manufactured emergencies to extract capital. I felt sick, but I forced myself to keep looking. On my mother's nightstand, there was a small notepad. She made lists for everything. I saw the indentation of handwriting on the top sheet, even though the page had been torn off. I grabbed a pencil from the cup holder and lightly shaded over the paper, an old trick I learned from a detective novel I read in middle school. The words appeared in white against the gray graphite. Passports, tickets, Dramamine for Bella, power bank, check if Harper is asleep, leave at 3:30 in the morning. The pencil snapped in my hand. Check if Harper is asleep. That single line destroyed the last crumbling fortification of my denial. It wasn't just that they didn't care, it was that they managed me. They viewed me as an obstacle to be circumvented. They knew I would be awake early to start the turkey. They knew they had to beat me to the door. It was a tactical extraction. I stood up, breathing hard. The room felt too small. I needed to get to the office. The small study on the ground floor was where the family business happened, which mostly meant where my father ignored bills until they turned red. I walked in and sat at the heavy oak desk. I didn't bother being gentle. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the metal runners groaning in protest. This was where the house documents lived, the deed, the insurance, the warranties. I pulled out the folder labeled House Maintenance. I started reading the contracts. New furnace, installed 2 years ago. There, at the bottom, was my signature. Cosigner. Roof replacement. Last year. My signature. Primary financing applicant. Homeowner's insurance policy. My name was listed right next to my father's as an insured party. I remembered signing these. My father had framed it as building my credit, or just a formality because your debt-to-income ratio is better than ours right now. I had signed because I trusted them. I had signed because I lived here, and I wanted the heat to work and the roof not to leak. But then I reached for a folder at the very back, one that wasn't labeled. It was stuffed with envelopes that had been ripped open and shoved out of sight. I pulled one out. It was from the county treasurer. Notice of delinquent property taxes. I opened another one. Second notice. Another. Intent to lien. My hands started to tremble, but this time it wasn't from emotion. It was from adrenaline. I read the dates. They hadn't paid property taxes in 2 years. The outstanding balance was over $8,000. But that wasn't the shock. The shock was the name on the addressee line. Gary Lane, Linda Lane, and Harper Lane. My name was on the tax bill. I stared at it, my mind racing back to 3 years ago. My father had refinanced the house to lower the rate. He had brought a notary to the kitchen table. He had put a stack of documents in front of me. Harper, honey, we need you to sign this quitclaim and addendum. It just helps with the tax structuring because you contribute to the household expenses. It protects you. I hadn't read the fine print. I had just signed. I pulled up the county assessor's website on my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I typed in the address. There it was. Owners of record, Gary Lane, Linda Lane, Harper Lane. The designation next to my name was specific. Tenant in common. I put the phone down. The silence in the room was deafening. They hadn't just made me a co-signer on the bills. They had made me a legal co-owner of the property. They probably thought they were being clever, using my credit score to secure the refinance, using my income history to satisfy the bank. They probably thought it didn't matter because Harper would never check. Harper would never leave, and Harper would never sue. But in doing so, they had handed me the weapon that would destroy them. I wasn't just a guest in this house. I wasn't just a tenant. I owned this house. I owned the walls, the floor, the roof I paid for, and I was legally liable for the taxes they weren't paying. The irony was so sharp I almost laughed. They were in Santorini, drinking wine and watching the sunset, spending the money that should have gone to the county treasurer, secure in the belief that they had escaped their responsibilities, but they had left the one person who actually understood the consequences holding the bag. I had one last thing to check. I picked up my phone again. I opened the messaging app. I scrolled past the Lane family group chat, which had been silent for 3 weeks. The last message was from me. Did anyone buy the sweet potatoes, or should I grab them on my way home? No one had answered. I went to the search bar. I typed in Santorini. Nothing came up in my texts, but then I remembered that my mother was terrible at technology. She often synced her calendar and contacts with the shared family cloud account I managed. I opened the cloud account. I went to the message archive that backed up automatically. And there it was. A group chat created 4 months ago. Title: Santorini 3. Only. I opened it. It was thousands of messages long. Mom, look at this swimsuit. Do you think it is too young for me? Bella, no way. You look hot. Harper would hate it though. She is such a prude. Dad, just book the catamaran tour. $200 a person. But worth it. Bella, did you tell Harper about the car repair money? Dad, handling it. She transferred it this morning. We are good for the deposit. Mom, I feel a little bad leaving her on Thanksgiving. Bella, OMG. Mom, stop. She loves playing the martyr. She will have a great time cleaning the house and feeling superior. Besides, the photos will look so much better with just the 3 of us. No offense, but she always looks so stiff. Dad, agreed. This is a break for us. A break from the gloom. I scrolled to the bottom, to a message sent yesterday, right before they must have boarded the plane. Bella, wheels up. Bye-bye Denver. Bye-bye Harper the Boar. Mom, freedom. I put the phone down on the desk. Harper the Boar, the martyr, the gloom. That was who I was to them. I wasn't a person. I was an atmospheric condition they had to endure. I was a bank account with a pulse. I looked at the stack of papers on the desk, the tax liens, the insurance policy, the roof contract, the furnace warranty, the travel itinerary funded by my car repair money. They thought they were so smart. They thought they had pulled off the perfect heist. They had taken the money, taken the vacation, and left the boring, reliable daughter behind to keep the lights on. But they had made a fatal error in their calculations. They forgot that when you make someone a co-owner to save your own skin, you give them rights. And they forgot that the boring daughter was a senior compliance analyst who did this for a living. I stood up. My legs felt strong. The trembling had stopped completely. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was something entirely different. I was a creditor. I looked around the room, at the computer bought with my money, the printer bought with my money, the very walls secured by my credit. "You want to treat me like a bank?" I said to the empty chair where my father usually sat to ignore his debts. "Fine. Then you are about to learn how a bank operates when the client defaults. Banks do not cry. Banks do not ask, 'Why didn't you love me?' Banks do not beg for inclusion. Banks audit, banks seize assets, and when the debt is high enough, banks foreclose." I gathered the tax letters, the deed information, and the Santorini 3 only transcripts into a neat pile. I held them against my chest like a shield. "Foreclosure," I whispered, tasting the word. It sounded like justice. I walked out of the office and back toward the kitchen. I had work to do. I had a timeline to build. I had assets to liquidate. And I had exactly 9 days to turn this house from a home into a ledger of debts paid. They were having a Thanksgiving feast in Greece. I was going to have a liquidation sale in Denver. I sat at the dining room table, the surface cool and smooth under my palms. The family trip note sat in the center, flanked by the 2 threatening letters from the tax assessor and my open laptop, which displayed the undeniable evidence of the Santorini 3 only group chat. For a moment, old habits tried to assert themselves. The ghost of the daughter I used to be, the peacemaker, the martyr, whispered that I should just wait. I closed my eyes and played out the scenario in my head. I would stay here. I would keep the house warm. I would water the plants. In 9 days, the front door would open, and they would bustle in. Tanned and laughing, I would stand there, arms crossed, waiting for an explanation. And then what? They would not apologize. I knew that with a sickening certainty. My mother would sigh, putting a hand to her chest, and say, "Oh, Harper, don't start. We just wanted everyone to have a good time, and you know how you get about flying." My father would nod and add, "We were protecting you from the stress. Honey, you are reacting too strongly. We only wanted what was best for you." I remembered a trip to the lake 3 years ago. I had asked, quietly, why I was sitting in the back seat with the luggage while Bella sat in the front, controlling the music. My mother had whipped around, her eyes hard. "You always complain. Harper, you say you are tired. You say the music is too loud. We do not want Bella to lose her spark just because you are in a mood." I had shut up then. I had internalized it. I was the killjoy. I was the mood dampener. If I waited for them to return from Santorini, the narrative would already be written. I would be the ungrateful daughter who couldn't be happy for her family's happiness. I would be the petty sister jealous of Bella's joy. They would spin the story until I was apologizing to them for ruining their homecoming. I opened my eyes. The kitchen was silent, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt heavy with truth. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Bella. Instead, I opened the security camera app connected to the doorbell and the driveway floodlight. I needed to see it. I needed to witness the departure not as a memory I wasn't part of, but as a factual event. I scrolled back the timeline. 12 hours ago, 3:30 in the morning. The video feed was grainy, shot in the high-contrast black and white of night vision. The front door opened. My father came out first, struggling with 2 massive suitcases. He looked over his shoulder, hissing something back into the house. I turned the volume up on my phone. "Hurry up," his voice came through, tinny but distinct. "Don't let the wheels squeak. If she wakes up, she is going to make a scene." My mother appeared next, carrying a tote bag and Bella's vanity case. She looked anxious, glancing up at the second-floor window. My window. "I left the note," she whispered. "That should be enough." Then Bella stepped out. She looked fresh, excited, wrapped in a cashmere scarf I recognized because I had bought it for myself 2 winters ago, and it had mysteriously disappeared from my closet. "Harper will sleep like a rock. Dad, stop worrying," Bella said. Her voice wasn't anxious, it was amused. "She is probably dreaming about tax returns." My father chuckled. "Let's just get loaded. We need to make the lounge before the breakfast service starts." They began loading the trunk of the SUV. Then, just before getting into the back seat, Bella paused and looked at my mother. "You double-checked the itinerary, right?" Bella asked. "I seriously do not want her in any of the photos this time. Remember the Christmas card? She stood so stiff she looked like a cardboard cutout. It ruined the aesthetic." My mother laughed, a soft, conspiratorial sound. "Don't worry, baby. I will crop her out if she somehow ends up in the frame of our minds. But she is not here. It is just us. Perfect." "Perfect," Bella echoed. I watched the SUV back out of the driveway. I watched the red taillights fade into the darkness. I watched the timestamp tick forward, marking the minutes I had spent sleeping while they erased me. I replayed that 10-second clip 3 times. I do not want her in any of the photos. It wasn't just about a vacation, it was about documentation. They wanted a life where I did not exist. They wanted the memories, the images, the narrative of the perfect Lane family to be free of the person who actually paid for the frame. I wasn't just a burden, I was a blemish. I put the phone down. I waited for the tears. I waited for the crushing weight of rejection to buckle my knees. But it didn't come. Instead, a strange, cool clarity washed over me. It was the feeling of a fever breaking, the emotional fog that had clouded my judgment for 29 years, the desperate need for approval, the fear of abandonment, the hope that if I just gave a little more, they would love me, evaporated. "At least I know," I whispered. My voice was steady. "No more illusions." I pulled a legal pad from my work bag. I uncapped a pen. I drew a line down the center of the page. On the left, I wrote, "What I paid for." On the right, I wrote, "How they treated me." I started writing. Refrigerator, dishwasher, roof repair, Bella's tuition, Dad's truck transmission, Mom's dental work, the vacation I wasn't invited to. The list on the left grew long, filling the page, a cascade of thousands upon thousands of dollars. On the right, I wrote, "Forgot my birthday, left me on Thanksgiving, called me a bore, mocked me to my face, used me as a bank." I looked at the 2 columns. In my line of work, we call this a discrepancy analysis. If a stranger had done this to me, taken my money, manipulated my emotions, isolated me from my own assets, I would have called the police. I would have called it financial abuse. Why was it any different just because we shared DNA? I realized then that I had a choice. I could be the victim. I could sit here and cry and wait for them to come back and gaslight me again, or I could be the solid, practical person they always claimed I was. They chose Santorini instead of me, I said to the empty room. I choose freedom instead of their reputation. I picked up my phone again. I had a draft text message open to my mother. Written an hour ago in a moment of weakness. It read, "Mom, why? What did I do wrong? Please call me." I looked at the cursor blinking at the end of the sentence. I held the backspace button. I watched the letters disappear, one by one, erasing the plea. When the text box was empty, I closed the messaging app. I opened a browser tab. My fingers moved quickly, typing with purpose. Moving company Denver holiday emergency. It was Thanksgiving Day. Most businesses were closed. The first 3 numbers I called went straight to voicemail. The fourth, a large chain, had an automated message saying they were booked until Monday. I didn't give up. I found a listing on the 3rd page of search results. Summit Peak Movers, a family-owned operation with 5-star reviews and a banner on their site that said 24/7 emergency services. I dialed. A man answered on the 2nd ring, sounding like he had a mouthful of pie. "Summit Peak, this is Dave." "Hi, Dave," I said. My voice was professional, the same tone I used when presenting an audit report to a board of directors. "I know it is a holiday. I need a full house move. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. There was a pause on the line. Tomorrow? Miss, that is Black Friday. My guys are technically off, and it is short notice. I will pay double your holiday rate, I said, and I will pay in cash or immediate wire transfer. It is a large job. 3 bedrooms, living room, kitchen appliances. Dave swallowed whatever he was eating. Appliances too? That is heavy lifting. I have the disconnect tools. Everything will be ready. I just need the muscle and the truck. Can you do it? For double the rate? He paused. Yeah, we can be there at 7. What is the address? I gave him the address. When I hung up, I felt a surge of adrenaline that was sharper and more satisfying than any joy I had felt in years. The clock was ticking. I had less than 20 hours before the truck arrived. I went upstairs to my bedroom and opened my personal filing cabinet. This was the one place in the house my parents never touched, mostly because they found my obsession with paperwork boring. I pulled out every folder. For years, I had kept every receipt, not because I planned this, but because I was an accountant. It was my nature. I had receipts for the Samsung refrigerator. I had the warranty card for the washing machine. I had the invoice for the sectional sofa, the dining table, the flat-screen TV. I had the credit card statements showing the purchase of Bella's entire bedroom suite, the bed, the mattress, the vanity, the rug. I sat on the floor and organized them into a black accordion folder. I labeled the sections with sticky notes: kitchen, living room, master bedroom, Bella's room, garage. Then, I opened my laptop again and went to the county assessor's website. I needed to be absolutely certain. I pulled up the deed again: Gary Lane, Linda Lane, Harper Lane. I navigated to the tax payment portal. The red warning text flashed on the screen: delinquent. I downloaded the entire history. Then I went to the section on property rights. I read the statutes on tenants in common in Colorado. A tenant in common has the right to possess and use the entire property. More importantly, personal property within the home that is purchased by one individual remains the sole property of that individual unless explicitly gifted. I looked at the pile of receipts. There were no gift receipts. There were no cards saying Merry Christmas, here is a dishwasher. There were just transactions. Legally, these items were mine. I was just moving my property from one residence I owned to another. But I needed a residence. I opened a real estate app. I had been looking at apartments for months, fantasizing about moving to Chicago or New York, but always stopping because of the guilt. Now, the guilt was gone. I filtered for immediate move-in and furnished/unfurnished. I found a luxury complex in downtown Denver, the kind with a concierge and a view of the Rockies. There was a 2-bedroom unit available on the 16th floor. It was expensive, more than I would have ever spent on myself before. I clicked apply. I uploaded my pay stubs, my credit report, which was immaculate, and my bank statements. I called the leasing office number listed. Miraculously, a leasing agent was working the holiday shift. I want the unit, I told her. I can sign the lease electronically right now. I can wire the first month and security deposit within the hour. Can I get the keys tomorrow? If the funds clear, absolutely, she said, sounding stunned. We can leave them in the lockbox. 30 minutes later, I had a new address. I stood up and walked through the house. I felt like a general surveying a battlefield before the first shot is fired. I started in the living room. I looked at the sofa. I looked at the television. I pulled a pack of small, neon-colored Post-it notes from my pocket. I had written a tiny H on the back of each one. I stuck a note on the back of the TV. I stuck a note on the underside of the coffee table. I stuck a note on the amplifier of the sound system. I moved to the kitchen. The refrigerator got a note. The microwave. The blender. The set of Japanese knives my mother loved to show off but never sharpened. I went to Bella's room. This was the hardest part. I stood in the doorway, looking at the vanity table. I had bought it for her when she was 18, hoping it would make her feel like the star she wanted to be. It was beautiful. White lacquer with Hollywood lights. I hesitated. Should I leave it? It seemed cruel to take her furniture. Then I heard her voice in my head again. I do not want her in the photos. They had erased me. They had taken my money and erased my face from their history. If I left the vanity, I was telling them that their behavior was acceptable. I was telling them that I was still their resource. I walked over to the vanity. I placed a neon note on the back of the mirror. "You want a blank slate?" I whispered. "I will give you a blank slate." I took everything: the rug, the curtains, the expensive duvet cover. I went to the linen closet. I tagged the towels I had bought. I tagged the sheets. I went to the garage. The snowblower was mine. The power washer was mine. The shelving units were mine. By the time I was done, the house was a sea of neon tags, invisible to the casual observer but glaringly obvious to me. I needed a witness. I couldn't let them claim I trashed the place. I needed proof that I took only what was mine and left the house in pristine condition. I called Talia. Talia was my best friend from college, a paralegal with a sharp mind and a low tolerance for nonsense. She knew about my family dynamics, but I had never told her the full extent of the financial entanglement. "Harper," she answered. "Happy Thanksgiving. Are you okay? You sound intense." "I need a favor," I said. "A big one. I need you to come over tomorrow at 6:30 in the morning. I need you to record me." "Record you doing what?" "Moving out," I said. "Everything. I am taking everything. Talia, the furniture, the appliances, the silverware." "Wait," Talia said. "Did they kick you out?" "No," I said. "They went to Santorini without me, and I realized I own the contents of this house, so I am repossessing my life." There was a silence on the line, followed by a low whistle. "Oh, hell yes. I will be there with a tripod and 4K resolution. Do you need me to bring donuts?" "Coffee," I said. "Lots of coffee." I hung up. There was one last detail: insurance. I pulled the homeowner's policy from the house maintenance folder. I scanned the declarations page. I remembered calling the agent last year when I bought the new electronics. I had insisted on a rider for personal property of secondary residence. Coverage: C, personal property, named insureds, Gary Lane, Linda Lane, Harper Lane. If I moved the items, they were still covered under my name, just at a different location for a grace period of 30 days. But if I left them here, and my parents decided to change the locks or claim I had gifted them, it would be a civil mess. Moving them was the smartest legal play. It established possession. It established intent. I sat back down at the kitchen table as the sun began to set. The house was getting dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I liked the shadows. They felt appropriate. I opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop. I titled it The Exit. Column A, item description. Column B, serial number. Column C, purchase date. Column D, cost. Column E, photo link. I spent the next 6 hours cataloging every single item I had tagged. I took photos with my phone and uploaded them to a cloud drive folder. I linked the photos to the spreadsheet. By midnight, the total value at the bottom of the spreadsheet made me gasp: $72,450. That was the replacement value of the items I was taking. That was the amount of capital I had injected into this house over the last 5 years, not including the cash transfers, the loans, and the utilities. It was a staggering number. It was a down payment on a house. It was a master's degree. It was a retirement fund. And they had treated it like it was nothing. They had treated me like nothing. I closed the laptop. I walked to the back door and checked the lock. I checked the garage. I stood in the center of the kitchen one last time. The bleach smell was still faint in the air, the scent of their attempt to clean up before their escape. Tomorrow. The bleach wouldn't matter. Tomorrow. The only thing left in this kitchen would be the built-in cabinets and the echo of their own greed. I touched the small neon sticker on the back of the espresso machine. "Happy Thanksgiving," I whispered. I went upstairs, but I didn't sleep in my bed. I slept in the guest room, on the mattress I hadn't bought. I wanted to wake up feeling like a stranger, because when the sun came up, that was exactly what I was going to be. The truck from Summit Peak Movers pulled into the driveway at exactly 6:45 in the morning. It was a massive white box truck, its engine idling with a low, guttural rumble that shattered the quiet of the suburban dawn. The air brakes hissed, a sound that felt like the starting gun of a race I had been training for my entire life without realizing it. I stood on the front porch, wrapped in my wool coat, holding a tray of steaming coffee cups. I watched 3 men jump down from the cab. They looked tired, rubbing their hands together against the biting November chill. The foreman, a burly man with a gray beard whom I recognized as Dave from the phone, approached the steps. He looked at the house, then at me, then at the empty driveway. "Morning," Dave said, his breath pluming in the cold air. "You are the emergency move? Harper?" "That is me," I said, stepping forward. I didn't look frantic. I didn't look like a woman in the middle of a breakdown. I handed him a coffee. "Black, 2 sugars, just like you sounded on the phone." Dave took the cup, looking surprised. "Thanks. Look, miss, before we start, I need to ask, is this a situation? We see a lot of divorces, a lot of disputes. I can't have the cops showing up here claiming we are aiding and abetting a robbery." I smiled. It was a calm, practiced smile. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the black accordion folder. It was 3 inches thick. "This is a complete inventory of every item being moved today," I said, handing it to him. "Attached to each inventory sheet is the original purchase receipt, the credit card statement showing the transaction in my name, and a copy of the deed proving I am a legal co-owner of this property with full rights of possession. I am not taking anything that does not legally belong to me. I am simply moving my assets to a new location." Dave opened the folder. He flipped through the first few pages, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. He saw the receipt for the Samsung refrigerator. He saw the warranty for the washer and dryer. He saw the serial numbers listed next to the photos. He looked up at me, a newfound respect in his eyes. "I have been moving folks for 20 years, he said. "I have never seen paperwork like this, not even from the corporate accounts." "I am an auditor," I said. "We like paper trails." Dave nodded. Closing the folder, he turned to his crew. "All right, boys. The lady is the boss. If it has a neon tag on it, it goes on the truck. If it doesn't, don't touch it. Let's move." Just as the first roll of packing tape shrieked, a car pulled up to the curb. It was Talia. She jumped out of her Honda, her phone already mounted on a stabilizing gimbal. She looked like a war correspondent arriving at the front lines. "I am rolling," Talia announced, walking up the driveway. "Timestamp is 702. Location is the Lane residence. Subject is Harper Lane moving personal property." She looked at me and winked. "You ready for this?" "Never been more ready," I said. We entered the house. The Summit Peak crew wasted no time. They were professionals, efficient and brutal in their speed. They started in the living room. I stood by the archway, watching them dismantle the space that had been the backdrop for so many family photos I was excluded from. The first thing to go was the sectional sofa. It was a massive gray velvet beast that I had bought, because my mother complained the old one smelled like dog. 2 movers lifted it effortlessly, maneuvering it through the door. When they took it away, the room suddenly looked vast and hollow. The carpet underneath was a shade lighter than the rest, a ghost of where the furniture had been. Next was the entertainment center. The 65-inch television came off the wall mount. The surround sound speakers were unhooked. The heavy oak coffee table was wrapped in thick, moving blankets. Within 40 minutes, the living room was stripped. All that remained were 2 flimsy folding chairs my father kept for overflow seating, and a scratching post for a cat we hadn't owned in 5 years. The room didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like an abandoned waiting room. "Kitchen next," I commanded. The kitchen was where the surgery became precise. Dave and his team brought in the appliance dollies. I watched them slide the refrigerator out of its alcove. There was a thick layer of dust and a few lost refrigerator magnets underneath. When they wheeled the giant stainless steel unit out the front door, the kitchen felt instantly broken. It was like pulling a tooth. The gap it left was gaping and dark. The dishwasher was harder. They had to shut off the water and disconnect the drain lines. I watched the plumber on their team work the wrench. Nice unit, the plumber grunted. Bosch Series 8, quietest on the market. I know, I said. That is why I bought it. My mother said the old one was too loud while she was watching her soaps. He laughed and capped the line. Well, she is going to have to hand wash now. I moved to the drawers. I had boxes ready for the smaller items. I packed the Wusthof knife block. My mother loved to show these knives off at dinner parties, telling guests they were a family investment. She wasn't lying. Technically, I was the family, and I made the investment. I wrapped the chef's knife in paper, feeling the weight of the blade. It felt good to hold it. I packed the espresso machine. I packed the Vitamix blender. I packed the entire set of Le Creuset cookware, the heavy cast-iron pots clanking softly as they went into the box. By the time we finished the kitchen, the counters were bare. The only things left were a rusted toaster from the 90s that my dad refused to throw away, and a set of chipped melamine plates they used for outdoor barbecues. We moved to the laundry room. The washer and dryer were the newest items in the house, purchased 6 months ago. They were front loaders, metallic gray, high efficiency. These are heavy, one of the movers said, wiping sweat from his forehead as they strapped the washer to the dolly. Commercial-grade motor. Take care of them, I said. They cost me 3 paychecks. You are taking the pedestals too? I am taking everything, I said. If it is gray and expensive, it is mine. As they wheeled the machines out, I leaned against the doorframe. They are going to miss those, I murmured to Talia, who was zooming in on the empty hookups on the wall. Mom hasn't been to a laundromat since 1998. Welcome to the real world, Linda, Talia whispered to the camera. Then we went upstairs. This was the emotional gauntlet. We started in Bella's room. I stood in the center of the room while the movers attacked the furniture. I watched them disassemble the bed frame. I watched them wrap the mattress in plastic, but it was the vanity table that made my chest tight. I had bought that vanity as a peace offering. Bella had just been cut from a local theater production, and she was inconsolable. I thought if I gave her a place to feel beautiful, she might be kinder. I was an idiot. The movers wrapped the mirror with bubble wrap. They took the chair with the faux fur seat. They cleared the bookshelf, packing the books I had bought for her classes. I opened the top drawer of the vanity to check for any stray items before they taped it shut. It was mostly empty, just some hair clips and dust, but in the back corner, stuck between the wood and the liner, was a white envelope. It was sealed. My name was written on the front in Bella's looping script. Harper. I frowned. I didn't remember Bella leaving me a card. I picked it up. It felt thick. I turned it over. On the back, in my mother's sharp, angular handwriting, was a note scrawled in blue ink. Not right now. She will just get emotional and ruin the mood. Save it for when she does something to deserve it. My breath hitched. I recognized the envelope now. It was the card Bella had bought for my 28th birthday last year. I remembered that birthday. I had cooked dinner. They had given me a scarf. I hadn't received a card from Bella. I assumed she had forgotten. She hadn't forgotten. She had written it, but my mother had intercepted it. Save it for when she does something to deserve it. I ripped the envelope open. Inside was a generic Happy Birthday Sister card. Bella had written, "Thanks for always helping me with my lines. You are a good sister." It was the bare minimum of kindness, a crumb, and my mother had decided I didn't even deserve the crumb. She had decided that my utility wasn't high enough that week, or maybe my attitude wasn't subservient enough. So she vetoed the only nice thing Bella had done for me in years. Talia lowered her phone. "Harper, you okay?" I looked at the card. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. This was just evidence. It was proof that their cruelty wasn't accidental. It was curated. It was managed. "I am fine," I said, my voice ice cold. I folded the card and slid it into my back pocket. "Actually, I am better than fine. I am validated." I turned to the movers. "Take the rug," I said, pointing to the plush white carpet on the floor. "Take the curtains, too. I paid for the rods." We moved to the home office. This was my sanctuary, or so I had thought. The L-shaped desk took up half the room. The ergonomic chair was customized to my height. The laser printer was a beast I used for work. "This is the last of the big stuff," Dave said, looking at the desk. "We are going to have to take the door off the hinges to get this out." "Do whatever you need to do," I said. "Just put the door back when you are done." I watched them dismantle my workspace. This was where I had spent countless nights working late to pay for the things they were now enjoying in Santorini. This was where I had processed the transfers to cover their debts. By 2 in the afternoon, the house echoed. It was a strange, hollow sound. Footsteps rang out on the bare floors. The walls, stripped of the art I had bought, looked stained and tired. I walked through the rooms one last time. The living room was a box of beige walls and cheap blinds. The kitchen was a skeleton, just cabinets and a gap-toothed counter. The laundry room was just a closet with pipes sticking out of the wall. It was devastating. It was beautiful. I went back to the kitchen. I placed the old garage door opener on the counter, right next to the rusted toaster. Then, I pulled the stack of tax notices from my bag. I laid them out in a fan shape, like a winning hand of poker. The red text, delinquent, seemed to glow in the afternoon light. I took a piece of paper and a Sharpie. I wrote a note, my handwriting large and steady. "These are not in my name. Good luck." I placed the note on top of the tax bills. Then I placed my house key on top of the note to weigh it down. "That is cold," Talia said, filming the arrangement. "I love it." "It is not cold," I said. "It is accounting, assets and liabilities. I took the assets. I left the liabilities." I walked to the entryway where the family portrait still hung. It was taken 5 years ago. My parents were seated in the center, smiling radiantly. Bella was leaning over my father's shoulder, beaming. I was standing off to the side, slightly out of focus, my smile tight. I took the frame off the wall. I popped the back open and slid the photo out. "You are not taking that?" Talia asked. "Not all of it," I said. I folded the photo in half, creating a sharp crease down the middle. I tore it slowly. The sound of the paper ripping was satisfyingly loud in the empty hall. I held the half with my parents and Bella. I looked at their smiling faces. Then I dropped it into the trash can by the door, the only trash can I was leaving behind. I put the half with my face into my pocket, right next to the birthday card. "Okay," I said. "I am done." We walked out the front door. The Summit Peak truck was fully loaded. The back door rolled down and locked. Dave was in the driver's seat, checking his mirrors. I locked the front door of the house from the outside. I slid the key through the mail slot. It landed on the floor inside with a metallic clatter that signaled the end of an era. I walked down the driveway to my car. The wind had picked up, blowing dry leaves across the concrete where the oil stains marked the spots of my parents' missing cars. I got into my sedan. Talia got into her car. Dave honked the horn of the truck, a short, sharp blast. He pulled out onto the street, the heavy vehicle groaning under the weight of my reclaimed life. I put my car in drive. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't look at the window of my old bedroom. I didn't look at the porch where I had waited so many times for them to come home. I kept my eyes on the white truck ahead of me. That truck held my refrigerator, my bed, my books, my clothes. It held $72,000 worth of dignity. I followed the truck toward the highway, toward the city, toward the 16th floor of a building where no one would ever tell me I was too boring to be in the picture. I turned on the radio. For the first time in 29 years, the static in my head was gone. 9 days later, I was sitting in my new living room on the 16th floor of the Skyline building in downtown Denver. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sleek, modern furniture I had rented along with the unit. I had a cup of Earl Grey tea steaming in my hand and my iPad propped up on the coffee table. On the screen, the familiar wide-angle view of my parents' driveway was displayed in high definition. I had been waiting for this moment since sunrise. According to the itinerary I had found on Bella's desk, their flight landed at 10 in the morning. Factoring in baggage claim and the drive from the airport, they were due any minute. At 11:15, the burgundy SUV pulled into the driveway. It was like watching a reality show where you already know the ending. My father, Gary, stepped out of the driver's side first. He looked tanned, wearing a linen shirt that was wrinkled from the flight, but clearly expensive. He stretched, rubbing his lower back, likely stiff from the business class seats they had purchased with my money. Bella hopped out of the back. She was glowing, her skin bronzed, wearing a white sundress and a straw hat that she probably bought in a boutique in Oya. She was holding her phone up, filming a selfie video as she walked toward the house. I could imagine the caption, "Home sweet home, missing the Greek sun already." My mother, Linda, brought up the rear. She looked relaxed, a stark contrast to the woman who usually fretted over everything. She was laughing at something Bella said, pointing to the suitcases in the trunk. They spent a few minutes unloading. They were loud, their voices carrying clearly through the microphone on the exterior camera. "I am telling you, that sunset in Fira was better than the one in Oya," my father argued good-naturedly. "But the lighting for the photos was better in Oya," Bella countered. "I need to edit those tonight. Harper is going to die when she sees how good I look." "Don't rub it in too much, honey," my mother said, though her tone suggested she intended to do exactly that. "She has been here alone all week. She is probably moody." "She is always moody," Bella laughed. They dragged the suitcases up the walkway. My mother fished her keys out of her purse. I took a sip of tea, my pulse holding steady. This was it. My mother unlocked the front door and pushed it open. She stepped inside, calling out in a sing-song voice, "Harper, we are home. We brought you some baklava." She took 2 steps into the foyer. Then she stopped. The camera angle from the doorbell only showed her back, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. She dropped her tote bag. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. "Gary," she said. Her voice wasn't a scream yet. It was a breathless gasp. My father was struggling with a heavy suitcase on the porch steps. "What? Is the alarm going off?" "Gary," she said again, louder this time. "The living room." My father pushed past her. He walked into the frame of the interior camera I had hidden on the bookshelf. Well, the bookshelf was gone, but I had left the small camera tucked discreetly on the fireplace mantel, powered by a battery pack. The living room was a cavern. The afternoon light hit the walls where the 65-inch television used to hang, illuminating the large, pale rectangle where the paint had not faded like the rest of the room. The floor was an expanse of beige carpet, marked by the deep, crushed indentations where the heavy sectional sofa had sat for 5 years. The sound system was gone. The coffee table was gone. The curtains were gone. The only things remaining were the 2 metal folding chairs leaning against the wall and the scratching post for the dead cat. "What the hell?" my father whispered. He spun around, looking wild-eyed. "Where is the furniture? Where is the TV?" Bella pushed her way in, still holding her phone. "Why are you guys blocking the—" She trailed off. She lowered her phone. "Did we get robbed?" "Robbed?" my mother shrieked. The panic finally broke through. "They took the sofa. Who steals a sofa? They took the curtains." "Check the rest of the house," my father barked, dropping the suitcase in the middle of the empty floor. "Check the kitchen." I switched the camera feed on my iPad to the kitchen view. My father ran in, followed closely by my mother. He stopped so abruptly his shoes squeaked on the tile. The kitchen was stripped. The refrigerator alcove was a dark, gaping mouth. The space under the counter where the dishwasher had been was just a mess of pipes and a capped water line. The granite countertops were completely bare. No espresso machine, no mixer, no toaster oven. Only the rusted, white plastic toaster from 1995 sat in the middle of the island, looking almost insultingly pathetic. "The fridge," my father stammered. "They took the damn fridge. Linda." "My Le Creuset," my mother wailed, opening the cabinets. "They took my pots. They took the plates." Then, a scream from upstairs tore through the air. It was Bella. "My room! Oh my God, my room!" My parents scrambled up the stairs. I didn't have cameras in the bedrooms. That felt like a violation of privacy I wasn't willing to commit, even for revenge. But the audio from the hallway monitor was crystal clear. It is gone! Bella was sobbing, a hysterical, jagged sound. My vanity, my mirror, my clothes, they took my clothes. Stay calm, my father was shouting, though he sounded anything but calm. Don't touch anything. It is a crime scene. They came thundering back downstairs. My mother was hyperventilating, clutching her chest. We need to call 911. Where is Harper? Oh, God. Do you think they took Harper too? They didn't take Harper, my father snapped. There is no ransom note. And look at the door. Linda, look at the windows. He walked over to the sliding glass door in the empty dining area. He checked the lock. It was engaged. He checked the front door. No pry marks, no shattered glass. There is no forced entry, he said, his voice dropping to a confused growl. How did they get the fridge out without breaking the door down? My mother was already dialing on her cell phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it once before connecting. Police! She screamed into the phone. I need the police. We have been robbed. They cleared us out. Everything. My house is empty. I took another sip of tea. The Earl Grey was cooling, but it still tasted delicious. I watched them pace the empty living room. My mother was sobbing into the phone, listing items. The television, the stereo, the sofa, the rugs. Yes, I said the rugs, even the towels. My father was pacing back and forth, kicking at the indentations in the carpet. It doesn't make sense, he muttered. The alarm didn't trip. The neighbors didn't call. Bella was sitting on the floor, because there were no chairs, crying over her phone. I can't post anything, she moaned. I can't even live here. I don't have a bed. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers walked to the door. They looked relaxed, expecting a standard burglary report. When they stepped inside, their reaction was subtle but telling. The older officer, a man with a thick mustache, looked around the cavernous room and raised an eyebrow. You said you were robbed? The officer asked, taking out a notepad. Look around you, my mother cried, gesturing wildly to the blank walls. They took everything. Any signs of forced entry? The officer asked, walking toward the back door. No, my father admitted. That is the crazy part. Everything was locked. The officer frowned. And you were gone for how long? 9 days, my father said. We were on vacation. We just got back. Was anyone supposed to be watching the house? The question hung in the air. My father exchanged a look with my mother. Our daughter, my father said, his voice taking on a darker edge. Harper, she was supposed to be here. She lives here. Is she here now? No, my father said. Her car is gone. We tried calling her, but it goes to voicemail. Does she have a key? The officer asked. Yes, my mother said. She has lived here for 5 years. The officer nodded, writing something down. And did you authorize her to move any furniture? Of course not, my mother snapped. Why would we authorize her to steal our things? I am not saying she stole them, ma'am, the officer said patiently. I am saying that usually, when there is no forced entry and a family member with a key is missing along with the furniture, it is a civil dispute, not a burglary. It is not a civil dispute, my father yelled. It is theft. That was a $3,000 television. That was a $5,000 sofa. Okay, the officer said, holding up a hand. We need to establish ownership. Do you have a list of the missing items? Everything, Bella shouted from the floor. My vanity, my makeup. We need specifics, the officer said, and receipts. Do you have proof of purchase for these high-value items? Serial numbers? Insurance riders? Yes, of course, my mother said, wiping her eyes. We keep all the records in the filing cabinet in the office. I leaned forward on my couch. This was the moment. The camera feed showed them moving into the small office. The desk was gone, leaving just the outline of dust on the floor where it had stood. But the metal filing cabinet, the cheap one they had bought 10 years ago, was still there in the corner. They left the cabinet, my mother said, sounding relieved. She rushed over to it. She yanked open the top drawer. It was empty. She yanked open the second drawer. Empty. She pulled the bottom drawer so hard it nearly came off the tracks. It was completely empty, except for a small, neat stack of papers sitting right in the center. "They took the papers?" my mother whispered, horror dawning on her face. "Why would they take the papers?" The officer stepped forward and looked into the drawer. He reached in and picked up the small stack of documents I had left. "Is this what you are looking for?" the officer asked. He looked at the papers. He frowned. He flipped the page. Then he looked up at my father, his expression changing from sympathy to professional suspicion. "Mr. Wayne," the officer said, "these are notices of delinquent property taxes." My father's face drained of color. "What?" "And an intent to lien," the officer continued. "It says here you are 2 years behind, almost $8,000 outstanding." That is a mistake," my father stammered. "We were handling that." "And there is a note," the officer said. He held up the piece of paper I had written on with a Sharpie. He read it aloud. "These are not in my name. Good luck." The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the officer's radio. "Who wrote this?" the officer asked. My mother stared at the note. She recognized the handwriting. "Harper," she breathed. "So," the officer said, putting the papers back in the drawer, "your daughter, who has a key, emptied the house and left you the tax bills. Sir, ma'am, this is definitely not a burglary. This is a domestic dispute." "She stole my appliances!" my mother shrieked, trying to pivot back to the victim role. "She can't just take a refrigerator. Arrest her." "Did she buy the refrigerator?" the officer asked pointedly. I don't know," my mother stuttered. "It was in my kitchen." "If she bought it, and she lives here, and she moved out taking her property, no crime has been committed," the officer said. He closed his notepad. "You need to contact your daughter, and you probably need a lawyer for these taxes. We can't help you." The officers turned to leave. My father tried to argue, chasing them to the door, but they were done. They had seen the empty drawers. They had seen the tax bills. They knew exactly what kind of people they were dealing with. As soon as the door closed, the house exploded into chaos. My phone, sitting on the coffee table next to my tea, lit up. "Incoming call, Mom." I let it ring. Then incoming call, Dad. I let it ring. Then incoming call, Bella. I watched the notifications stack up. Then came the voicemails. I picked up my phone and tapped the speaker button, letting their voices fill my serene, sunlit apartment. The first voicemail was from my mother. Her voice was trembling, fake worried. "Harper? Honey? We are home. The house. Something happened. Please call us. We are so worried about you." She was still trying to play the game. She thought maybe, just maybe, I had been kidnapped and this was all a misunderstanding. 5 minutes later, the second voicemail. My father. The pretense was dropping. "Harper, pick up the phone. The police were here. This isn't funny. You need to bring the furniture back right now. You are going to be in serious legal trouble." 10 minutes later, Bella. "You are such a bitch. Harper, where is my vanity? I have a shoot tomorrow. You can't do this. Mom is crying. I hate you." I took a sip of tea. "I know, Bella," I whispered to the phone. "I know." Another voicemail from my mother. This one was pure rage. "I don't know what you think you are doing, but you are stealing from this family. We fed you. We housed you. And this is how you repay us? By stripping the house bare while we are on vacation? Bring it back, Harper, or I swear to God, I will sue you for everything you have." I looked back at the iPad. My mother was standing in the empty hallway, talking to my father. She didn't know the camera on the mantel was recording audio. "What are we going to do, Gary?" she hissed. "We have no fridge. We have no beds. And the tax thing. The cops saw the tax thing." "We will fix it," my father said, pacing. "We will tell them she stole the money too. We will say she was supposed to pay the taxes and she embezzled it." "We can't," my mother whispered. Her voice was low, but the microphone picked it up perfectly. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. "Why not?" my father asked. "Because," my mother said, looking around the empty house with a look of pure regret. "We put her name on the deed. Gary, remember? For the refinance 3 years ago. She's a legal owner. We shouldn't have put her name on anything. If she is an owner, she didn't steal anything. She just moved." I froze. My hand hovered over the iPad. There it was, the admission. We shouldn't have put her name on anything. They weren't sorry they used me. They weren't sorry they left me. They were sorry they had made a clerical error that gave me power. I pressed the Save Clip button on the app. I named the file Admission of Ownership, MP4. Then I created a new folder on my laptop. I dragged the video file into it. I dragged the footage of them entering the house into it. I dragged the footage of the police officer reading the tax bill into it. I named the folder When They Came Home. On the screen, my family was sitting on the floor of the living room. Bella was curled up in a ball, sobbing. My father was staring at the blank wall where the TV used to be. My mother was holding her head in her hands. They looked small. They looked defeated. And for the first time in 29 years, they looked like they were finally paying for their own lives. I turned off the iPad. I finished my tea. "Welcome home," I said to the black screen. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-capped Rocky Mountains in the distance. The legal battle was coming next. I knew that. They wouldn't go down without a fight. They would sue. They would lie. They would try to drag me back into the mud. But I had the receipts. I had the video. And most importantly, I had the one thing they never thought I would have. I had the will to watch them fall. 3 days after my family returned to an empty shell of a house, there was a knock at my door. It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I was working from home, sitting at the L-shaped desk I had successfully reassembled in the second bedroom, which now served as my office. I stood up and walked to the door. I checked the peephole. 2 uniformed officers from the Denver Police Department stood in the hallway. They did not look like they were there to break down a door. They looked polite, weary, and slightly apologetic. I smoothed my sweater, took a deep breath, and opened the door. "Good morning," I said. The taller officer, a man with graying hair and a name tag that read Miller, nodded. "Good morning. Are you Harper Lane?" "I am," I replied. "We are following up on a report filed by Gary and Linda Lane regarding a burglary at their residence," Officer Miller said. "Your name was mentioned as someone who might have access to the property or knowledge of the situation." Mentioned was a polite way of saying my parents had accused me of grand larceny. "I understand," I said, stepping back and opening the door wider. "Please, come in. I have been expecting you." The officers exchanged a brief glance, probably surprised that I wasn't barricading myself inside or screaming, and stepped into the apartment. My new place was bathed in morning light, the gray sectional sofa, which had looked so bulky and out of place in my parents' dark living room, fit perfectly against the far wall here. The 65-inch television was mounted cleanly above a console table. The rug from Bella's room added a soft, warm texture to the hardwood floor. For the first time, these objects looked like they belonged. They weren't just expensive clutter in a house that resented them. They were part of a home. Officer Miller looked around, his eyes landing on the sofa. He didn't say anything, but I saw the recognition. My mother had probably described that sofa in agonizing detail. "Nice place," the second officer said. He was younger, holding a tablet. "Thank you," I said. "Can I get you water? Coffee?" "No, thank you, ma'am," Miller said. He took out a small notebook. "We just need to ask you a few questions. Your parents allege that while they were on vacation, items totaling approximately $70,000 were removed from the home without their permission. Do you know anything about this?" I looked him in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't fidget. "I do," I said. "I removed them." The younger officer stopped tapping on his tablet. Miller paused, his pen hovering over the paper. They were expecting a denial. They were expecting a story about a misunderstanding, or a claim that I was just borrowing things. "You removed them?" Miller repeated. "You admit to taking the property?" "I admit to moving my property," I corrected him gently. I did not take anything that belonged to Gary or Linda Lane. I took the items that I purchased, with my own money, from my own bank accounts. I walked over to the kitchen island, my kitchen island, which was clean and mine, and picked up the black accordion folder I had prepared days ago. I placed it on the coffee table in front of them. "This is for you," I said. Miller opened the folder. The first page was a summary spreadsheet, color-coded and cross-referenced. Behind it were the receipts. "Every item in this apartment," I said, pointing to the folder, "corresponds to a receipt in that binder. You will find the serial number for the television, the warranty registration for the washer and dryer in the utility closet, and the credit card statements for the furniture. I also included the delivery manifests that show my name as the purchaser." Miller flipped through the pages. He stopped at a yellow piece of notepad paper stapled to a Best Buy invoice. It was a handwritten note from my mother that read, "Harper, thanks for buying the fridge. Dad and I will pay you back when the tax return comes in." "They never paid me back," I said, noticing him reading the note. "You can check the bank statements in Section 3. There are no incoming transfers from them matching these amounts, ever." Miller continued to flip through the folder. The silence in the room stretched out, broken only by the rustle of paper. The younger officer leaned over to look. "Holy cow," the younger one whispered. "She kept the receipts for the blender." Miller looked up at me. His expression had shifted from professional suspicion to something bordering on bewilderment. "Miss Lane, I have been responding to domestic disputes for 15 years. I have never seen anyone keep records like this for a theft report." "It is not a theft report," I said, sitting down in the armchair opposite them. "It is a relocation of assets. I am an auditor by trade. Officer, paper trails are my life." I took a breath, keeping my voice steady. My parents have used my income to subsidize their lifestyle for 5 years. They went on a luxury trip to Greece for Thanksgiving and left me behind without a word. While they were gone, I decided I no longer wanted to be their live-in ATM machine, so I moved out, and I took what was mine. Miller nodded slowly. "I see." He closed the folder but kept his hand on it. "The issue is, you were living in the family home. Even if you bought the items, if they were intended as gifts or part of the household." "I am not just a tenant," I interrupted. "I am a co-owner." I reached into the back of the folder and pulled out the property deed and the tax assessment from the county website. I slid them across the table. 3 years ago, my parents refinanced the house," I explained. "They needed my credit score and my income to get the loan approved. They added me to the deed. I am a tenant in common. I have equal rights to the property. I am also legally liable for the debts." I pointed to the red text on the tax assessment. "As you can see, the property is in arrears. I am currently the only one paying toward the roof repair loan, which is also in the file. I did not steal from their house. Officer, I moved my personal property out of a house I co-own because the other owners were financially abusing me." Miller picked up the deed. He read the names: Gary Lane, Linda Lane, Harper Lane. He let out a long, slow breath. He looked at the younger officer. "Call dispatch." The younger officer keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo, regarding the 211 at the Lane residence." "Go ahead, 4 Bravo." The radio crackled. "Cancel the report," the officer said. "This is a civil matter. No crime has been committed. Suspect is a legal co-owner of the property and has provided proof of purchase for all disputed items. Repeating, this is civil, not criminal." "Copy that. 4 Bravo." The static cut out. In that silence, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. It wasn't just relief. It was validation. For 29 years. My parents had controlled the narrative. They were the victims. I was the ungrateful one. They were the loving parents. I was the cold daughter. But here, in the eyes of the law, their story fell apart. The facts were on the table, and the facts were on my side. Officer Miller stood up. He handed the deed back to me, but he tapped the folder of receipts. "I am going to need to take copies of these receipts to file with the report," he said, "just to cover our bases so they don't try to file again." "I made copies for you," I said. pulling a second, thinner folder from the back. "That one is yours to keep." Miller actually smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was genuine. "You really did think of everything." "I had to," I said. They walked toward the door. Before he opened it, Miller turned back to me. His demeanor had softened completely. He wasn't talking to a suspect anymore. He was talking to a citizen who was dealing with a mess. "Miss Lane, I am going to be honest with you," he said. "Your parents are agitated. They are claiming you ruined their house. They are claiming you left them destitute." "I left them with the house," I said. "I just took the things inside it." "Right," Miller said. "Well, given the state they are in, if they show up here, if they bang on your door or harass you by phone, you call us. You have established residency here. You are the leaseholder. They have no right to be here." He paused, then added, almost under his breath, "And regarding the property, if they want that toaster back, tell them to hire a lawyer. Do not talk to them without one. This is way above police pay grade." "Thank you, officer," I said. "Good luck, Harper," he said. They left, closing the door softly behind them. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my back against the cool wood of the door and closed my eyes. I listened to the silence of my apartment. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of my parents' house on Thanksgiving morning. It was a clean silence, a safe silence. I hadn't won a lottery. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply told the truth, and for the first time, the truth was enough. They couldn't talk their way out of receipts. They couldn't guilt-trip a property deed. I walked back to my desk. My laptop was open. A notification bubble was bouncing on the email icon. I sat down and clicked it. It was an automated alert from the county treasurer's office, forwarded to me because my email was the primary contact on the deed. Another administrative task my mother had delegated to me because she didn't understand computers. Subject: urgent. Notice of intent to foreclose. Final warning. I opened the email. The text was stark and red. "Dear property owner, this is a final notice regarding the delinquent property taxes for the parcel located at 422 Willow Creek Drive. The outstanding balance of $7,842 remains unpaid. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in the initiation of tax lien sale proceedings." I read it twice. My parents had been home for almost 2 weeks. They had seen the notices I left on the counter. They had screamed about the furniture, called the police about the refrigerator, and cried about the vanity. But they hadn't paid the taxes. They were still playing the same game. They were ignoring the problem, assuming that if they waited long enough, the boring, solid daughter would swoop in and fix it because she wouldn't want her credit ruined. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I was hiding in this apartment, terrified of their anger, and that eventually I would crack and write the check just to make the noise stop. They didn't realize that the daughter who paid their bills was dead. The woman who lived in this apartment was a co-owner who knew exactly how to leverage a distressed asset. "Property at risk of lien," I whispered, reading the screen. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. They wanted to involve the law? They wanted to threaten me with legal action for taking my own sofa? "Okay," I said to the empty room. "You want to play legal games? Let's play." I wasn't going to pay the taxes to save them. I was going to pay the taxes to own them. I opened a new tab and searched for real estate attorney, partition actions. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to take the only thing they had left, and I was going to do it exactly by the book. 3 weeks after the police left my apartment, the envelope arrived. It was not a text message or a voicemail this time. It was a thick manila envelope taped to my front door by a process server who had waited until I came home from work. Inside was a summons to the Denver County Civil Court. Gary Lane, Linda Lane, and Bella Lane were suing me. I stood in my hallway, reading the legal complaint under the bright entryway light. The document was a masterpiece of creative writing. They were demanding $15,000 in damages. The charges listed were intentional infliction of emotional distress, theft of household contents, and destruction of family property. They claimed that my actions, moving my own furniture out of the house, had rendered their home uninhabitable and caused Bella severe psychological trauma that interfered with her career as an influencer. At first, I felt a wave of exhaustion so heavy I had to lean against the wall. I had hoped that showing the police the receipts would be the end of it. I had hoped that once they realized they had no legal standing, they would retreat into their shame and leave me alone. But I had underestimated their entitlement. They did not see me as a person with rights. They saw me as a rebellious appliance that needed to be kicked until it started working again. They weren't suing me to get the money. Not really. They were suing me to punish me. They wanted to drag me into a public forum and scold me until I apologized and moved back in to resume my role as their bank. The exhaustion lasted exactly 5 minutes. Then, it was replaced by the same cold, hard resolve that had helped me clear out the house in 6 hours. I walked into my home office and placed the summons on my desk next to my laptop. I did not call a lawyer. I did not have the money to pay a retainer after the deposit on this apartment and the moving costs. Besides, this was small claims court. Lawyers were allowed, but not required. And I knew this case better than any attorney ever could. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I treated the lawsuit like a high-stakes audit at Aurora Compliance Analytics. I created binders. I printed 3 copies of every receipt, every bank statement, and every email. I went to the county records office and paid for certified copies of the deed and the tax liens. I organized the evidence chronologically, color-coded by item and value. I also downloaded the video files from the folder I had named When They Came Home. I put them on a USB drive and also saved them to my tablet, ensuring I could play them offline if the court Wi-Fi failed. On the morning of the hearing, Denver was gray and freezing. I dressed in my best suit, a charcoal gray blazer and tailored trousers. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. I looked like a woman who was there to discuss mergers and acquisitions, not a woman there to fight her parents over a used sofa. The courthouse was a dreary building smelling of floor wax and stale coffee. The hearing was assigned to courtroom 3B, a small room usually reserved for landlord disputes and minor contract disagreements. When I walked in, they were already there. My parents sat on the wooden bench on the plaintiff's side. My mother was wearing a pastel cardigan that made her look frail and grandmotherly, a stark contrast to the woman who had screamed at me on voicemail. My father wore a suit that was slightly too large, trying to project the image of a weary, respectable patriarch. Bella sat between them, wearing oversized sunglasses and dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. They did not look at me when I entered. They stared straight ahead, their postures rigid with self-righteousness. I sat alone at the defendant's table. I placed my thick binder in front of me. I set up my tablet. I placed my hands on the table, fingers interlaced, and waited. The bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Sterling. He was a man in his 60s with a face carved from granite and eyes that looked like they had seen every petty lie humanity had to offer. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and picked up the file. Case number 492, Judge Sterling read. Lane versus Lane. This is a family dispute? Yes, Your Honor, my father said, standing up. His voice wavered perfectly. We are suing our daughter, Harper Lane, for stripping our home of its contents while we were away on a family vacation. Go on, the judge said, leaning back. My father launched into his opening statement. It was a story I barely recognized. He described a loving family who had gone on a once-in-a-lifetime trip to celebrate Bella's graduation, which was a lie. She graduated 3 years ago. He claimed they had left me behind because I had volunteered to watch the house. We came home to a shell, Your Honor, my father said, his voice catching with emotion. No beds, no refrigerator, no place to sit. Harper cleared it out of spite. She has always been emotionally unstable. She was jealous that she couldn't come on the trip, so she decided to punish us. It was a vindictive act that has left us living in an empty house for weeks. Then it was Bella's turn. She stood up, taking off her sunglasses to reveal eyes that were not red, but certainly widened for effect. I can't even invite my friends over, Bella said. her voice trembling. "My room is gone, my vanity, where I do my work. She took it. It is humiliating. I haven't slept well in weeks because the house echoes so much. I feel unsafe knowing my own sister could do this." My mother added the finishing touch. "We just want to be made whole, Your Honor. We want $15,000 to replace the essential items she stole and to cover the therapy Bella now needs." Judge Sterling listened to them without expression. He made a few notes, then he turned his gaze to me. "Miss Lane," the judge said, "you have heard the accusations. Did you remove these items from the home?" I stood up. My legs did not shake. My voice did not tremble. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I removed the items." My mother let out a loud, dramatic gasp. My father shook his head as if to say, "See? She admits it." "However," I continued, my voice cutting through their theatrics, "I reject the characterization that I stole them. I simply moved my own property." I opened my binder. "Your Honor, I work as a senior analyst for Aurora Compliance Analytics. I deal in facts and paper trails. The folder before you contains the original receipts, bank statements, and delivery manifests for every single item I removed from the house." I walked the folder up to the bench. The bailiff took it and handed it to the judge. "Tab 1, I said. "The Samsung refrigerator, purchased November 2022. Paid for with a Visa card ending in 4591. That card is in my name only. Tab 2, the Bosch dishwasher. Tab 3, the sectional sofa. Tab 4, the bedroom set in Bella Lane's room." Judge Sterling flipped through the pages. The room was silent except for the sound of turning paper. He stopped at the receipt for the vanity. "This vanity," the judge said, looking at Bella. "You claimed this was yours?" "It was in my room," Bella cried. "She gave it to me." "Your Honor," I said calmly, "there is no record of a gift. I purchased it. I retained the receipt. When I moved out, I took it with me. In the state of Colorado, unless a transfer of ownership is documented or explicitly stated as a gift in a way that can be proven, the purchaser retains the title to the property." The judge looked back at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Lane, do you have any receipts proving you purchased these items?" My father stammered, "Well, no, Your Honor. We don't keep receipts for every little thing, but they were in our house. Possession is 9/10 of the law." "Not when the other party has the receipt for the remaining 1/10, Judge Sterling said dryly. "And these are not little things. These are major appliances and furniture." "But she lived with us," my mother argued, her facade cracking. "She paid for things as her contribution to the household. That makes them family property." "I paid for them because you refused to," I said, addressing the judge, not her. "And speaking of the household, I would like to direct the court's attention to tab 5. Judge Sterling turned to tab 5. "This is a certified copy of the property deed for the house at 422 Willow Creek Drive," I said. "As you can see, my name is listed as a tenant in common. I am a legal co-owner of the property." My parents went rigid. They clearly hadn't told their story to anyone who understood property law. "I also included the current tax assessment," I added, "which shows the property is in arrears for nearly $8,000. I am the only owner currently making payments toward the maintenance of the home's infrastructure, specifically the roof loan listed in tab 6. The judge looked at the tax documents. His eyebrows went up. He looked at my father. "Mr. Lane, you are suing a legal co-owner of the property for moving furniture she bought, while you are 2 years behind on property taxes?" That is a separate issue," my father mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The issue is the emotional distress. She ruined our vacation. She planned this to hurt us." "To that point, Your Honor," I said, "I have one piece of electronic evidence I would like to submit regarding the family vacation and the claim that I was merely left behind to watch the house." I held up my tablet. "May I approach?" Judge Sterling nodded. "Proceed." I walked to the bench and placed the tablet on the stand facing the judge and the plaintiffs. I pressed play on the video file dated Thanksgiving morning, 3:30 a.m. The sound of the wind in the microphone filled the quiet courtroom. Then, my father's voice. "Hurry up. Don't let the wheels squeak. If she wakes up, she is going to make a scene." My mother's voice. "I left the note. That should be enough." Then Bella's voice, clear and mocking. "Harper will sleep like a rock. Dad, I seriously do not want her in any of the photos this time. It ruined the aesthetic." And finally, my mother's laugh. "I will crop her out if she somehow ends up in the frame. It is just us. Perfect." I let the video play until the taillights faded. Then I paused it. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Bella was staring at the table, her face bright red. My mother had a hand over her mouth. My father looked like he wanted to vanish through the floorboards. Judge Sterling took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at my parents for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You sued your daughter for emotional distress," the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yet here is video evidence of you sneaking out of your own home in the middle of the night to avoid including her in a holiday trip, explicitly stating you did not want her in your photos." We didn't mean it like that," my mother whispered. "It sounded exactly like that," Judge Sterling snapped. "You refer to this as a family trip, but the evidence suggests you do not consider your daughter to be part of that family unless she is paying for your appliances." He closed the file with a sharp slap that made Bella jump. "Mr. and Mrs. Lane, you have provided zero evidence of ownership for the disputed items. Your daughter has provided exhaustive proof. You claim she has no right to the property, yet the deed shows she owns the house just as much as you do, and you claim emotional distress, yet you seem to be the primary architects of the toxicity in this relationship." The judge leaned forward. "This court is a place for resolving legal disputes," he said. "It is not a tool for you to alleviate your guilt or to bully a family member into submission. You abuse the legal process by bringing this frivolous claim." He picked up his gavel. "Case dismissed with prejudice. The defendant, Harper Lane, owes you nothing, not the furniture, not the money, and certainly not an apology." He looked at me. His eyes softened just a fraction. "Miss Lane, you are free to go, and I suggest you keep those receipts." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. My father stood up, his face purple. But the house is empty. We can't live like this." "Then I suggest you go buy some furniture," Judge Sterling said, standing up to leave, "and pay your taxes before the county takes the house entirely." The gavel banged. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. My parents sat there, stunned into silence. Bella looked at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of hatred and genuine fear. For the first time in her life, her tears hadn't worked. Her charm hadn't worked. The narrative she had built, that she was the princess and I was the troll, had been dismantled by facts. She realized, in that moment, that I was not beneath her. I was not her servant. I was a force she could not control. I packed up my tablet. I closed my binder. I did not look at them. I did not say, "I told you so." I did not say goodbye. I turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. My heels clicked rhythmically on the floor. I pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped out into the hallway, then out the main entrance of the courthouse. The air outside was biting cold. A light snow had started to fall, dusting the gray concrete of Denver with white. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sharp and clean. I felt lighter than I had ever felt in my life. It wasn't just the victory, it was the severance. Standing there on the courthouse steps, watching the snow swirl around the streetlights, I realized what had just happened. I hadn't just won a lawsuit, I had finalized a divorce. I had divorced my parents. I had divorced my sister. I had divorced the version of myself that needed them. I buttoned my coat, wrapped my scarf tighter, and walked toward my car. I was going back to my apartment. I was going to sit on my sofa. I was going to watch my television, and I was going to sleep in a bed that belonged, entirely and indisputably, to me. The legal battle for the furniture was over, but as I unlocked my car, I thought about the tax foreclosure notice still sitting in my inbox. The battle for the house was just beginning, and unlike them, I was prepared for winter. After the courthouse victory, my life began to settle into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to happiness. My apartment on the 16th floor was always filled with light. I bought plants that I actually remembered to water. I made friends with a woman down the hall named Sarah, and we started going to a spin class on Thursday nights. For the first time in 29 years, I wasn't rushing home to fix a crisis or answer a frantic text about a leaking pipe. But the ghost of the house on Willow Creek Drive wasn't done haunting me. The emails from the county treasurer kept coming. Now that the county had updated their records following my parents' clumsy attempts to dispute the ownership, the notifications were sent to all 3 email addresses on file: mine, my father's, and my mother's. Second notice: delinquent taxes. Third notice: imminent lien sale. I watched the dates tick by. I knew exactly what my parents were doing. They were playing a game of chicken. They were betting everything on the assumption that Harper, the responsible one, the one with the credit score to protect, would eventually crack. They assumed I would panic at the thought of a foreclosure on my record and pay the $8,000 just to make the red letters go away. They believed that even in my estrangement, I was still their safety net. They were half right. I wasn't going to let the house be seized by the county, but I wasn't going to save them, either. I made an appointment with a real estate attorney named Mr. Henderson. He was a sharp, older man with an office that smelled of mahogany and expensive decisions. I brought my accordion folder. I brought the deed. I brought the proof of the roof payments, the furnace payments, and the unpaid tax notices. Here is the situation, I told him, laying the documents out on his desk. My parents and I are tenants in common. They live there. I do not. They are refusing to pay the taxes. Assuming I will do it to protect my credit, I want to know what my options are. Mr. Henderson looked through the file. He stopped at the page showing the disparity in financial contributions. You have paid for almost every capital improvement on this property in the last 5 years, he noted. And now you are looking at a tax lien. Exactly, I said. I am done subsidizing them, but I don't want to walk away empty-handed. Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair. Well, Miss Lane, you have a very powerful tool at your disposal. It is called a partition action. He explained that as a co-owner, I had the absolute right to force the division of the property. Since a single-family home cannot be physically divided, the court would order it to be sold. However, he added, a glint in his eye, given that you are the only one preserving the asset from foreclosure, we can make a specific argument. If you pay the taxes in full right now, we can file for an accounting and contribution. We can argue that their share of the equity has been consumed by the debts they owe you. For the taxes, the roof, the maintenance, we can ask the court to grant you full title or force a sale where the proceeds go primarily to you to satisfy their debt. I sat in silence for a long moment. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. This was the nuclear option. This was taking the house they had lived in for 30 years, the house where I grew up, the house they claimed was their legacy, and stripping it from them. I thought about the Santorini 3-only group chat. I thought about the empty vanity. I thought about the years of being the solid one while they treated me like a utility bill. Do it, I said. I went to the bank that afternoon. I took the remaining money from my savings account, money I had been hoarding for a down payment on a condo of my own, and I wrote a cashier's check to the county treasurer for $7,842. It hurt to see the balance drop. It felt like jumping off a cliff without a parachute, but I handed the check to the clerk with a steady hand. Paid in full by Harper Lane, I told her. Make sure the receipt reflects that. 3 days later, Mr. Henderson filed the partition action. My parents didn't sue me this time. They were the ones being sued. When they received the court papers, the reaction was immediate. My phone lit up with a call from my father. I didn't answer. Then my mother called. I didn't answer. Then came the voicemail. Harper, what is this? My father's voice was shaking, sounding breathless and panicked. We got papers from a court. It says you want to sell the house? You can't do this. This is our home. This is the family legacy. You are destroying everything we built because of a petty grudge? I listened to the message in my quiet apartment. I didn't feel guilty. I felt a strange, clinical detachment. You didn't build it, I whispered to the phone. I paid for it. I sent them a single text message in response. You have ignored the tax bills for 2 years. I paid them to prevent foreclosure. Now, for the first time, you have to pay for what you live in. See you in court. The hearing was scheduled for a month later. It was a different courtroom, a different judge, but the dynamic was the same. I sat on one side with Mr. Henderson. My parents and Bella sat on the other, looking smaller and more haggard than I had ever seen them. They didn't have a lawyer. They couldn't afford one. Mr. Henderson was ruthless. He presented the spreadsheet. He showed the judge that while the deed said 50-50 ownership between the parents as one unit and me as the other, the financial reality was 90-10. I had paid for the roof. I had paid for the furnace. I had paid the insurance. And now I had paid the taxes. Your Honor, Mr. Henderson said, Mr. and Mrs. Lane have lived in this property rent-free, tax-free, and maintenance-free, subsidized entirely by my client. They have been unjustly enriched at her expense. To allow this to continue is inequitable. We are asking for a partition by sale, or a buyout of the defendant's interest, adjusted for the debts they owe Miss Lane. My father tried to speak. He stood up, looking terrified. Your Honor, we are her parents. We raised her. We can't just be thrown out on the street. We are looking for money to pay her back. You have had 2 years to pay the taxes, Mr. Lane, the judge said, looking over his glasses, and you went to Greece instead. The judge looked at the numbers. It was simple math. The equity they theoretically had in the house was almost entirely negated by the money they effectively owed me for the upkeep and the taxes. I am granting the partition, the judge ruled. Miss Lane has carried the financial burden of this property alone. The court finds that the defendant's equity has been exhausted by their debts to the plaintiff. The judge gave me 2 options. I could force the house to be sold on the open market, and we would split the proceeds after I was reimbursed, which would leave them with almost nothing, or I could buy out their remaining interest for a court-determined sum and take full title to the property. I looked at my parents. My mother was crying into a handkerchief. Bella was chewing on her fingernail, looking at the floor. If I sold the house, strangers would live there. It would be over. But if I kept it, I will take the title. I told Mr. Henderson, I chose to keep the house, not to live in. I never wanted to sleep under that roof again. But the rental market in our suburb was exploding. That house, with its 4 bedrooms and good school district, could rent for $3,000 a month. It was an asset. It was cash flow. The judge set the buyout price. Because of the debts they owed me, the amount I had to pay them to legally remove their names from the deed was shockingly low. $5,000. $5,000 to own a $500,000 home. So ordered, the judge said. The defendants have 30 days to vacate the property. The signing day was the last time I saw them. We met at a title company office. The air in the conference room was thick enough to choke on. My mother wouldn't look at me. She signed the quitclaim deed with a shaking hand. My father signed next, pressing the pen so hard into the paper I thought it might snap. When it was done, I slid the cashier's check for $5,000 across the table. My mother looked at the check. Then she looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a bewildered sorrow. Harper, she whispered, do you really hate us this much? You really want to take everything from this family? I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I looked at the woman who had left me a note on Thanksgiving morning telling me I wouldn't enjoy the flight. I am not taking everything, I said softly. I am only taking the part I paid for, and I am letting you keep the consequences you tried so hard to avoid. I picked up my copy of the deed. I was the bank of this family for a long time, Mom, but the bank is closed. Bella stood up abruptly. She grabbed the check from the table and glared at me. I hate you, she hissed. You are a monster. I looked at my sister. I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. She was 22 years old, and she was about to learn how hard the world really was when you didn't have a sister to pay for your vanity table. "You can hate me," I said, "but one day, you will learn that no one has the right to use another person endlessly without paying the price. Consider this your first tuition payment." I walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. 3 months later, I parked my car across the street from 422 Willow Creek Drive. It was a Saturday morning. A moving truck, not Summit Peak Movers this time, but a different company, was parked in the driveway. A young couple was carrying boxes into the house. They looked happy. They looked excited. I watched them for a long time. They were the new tenants. They had signed a 2-year lease. The rent they paid me every month covered the mortgage on that house, which was small, thanks to the refinance years ago, and the rent on my luxury apartment downtown, with enough left over to put into my investment portfolio. The house wasn't a wound anymore. It wasn't a symbol of my neglect. It was just a building. It was wood and brick and glass that worked for me now, instead of draining me. I put my car in gear and drove away. I drove toward the city, toward the skyline that glittered in the sun. Thanksgiving came around again 7 months later. I woke up in my apartment. The morning light was soft and gray. There was no smell of bleach. There was no note on the counter. I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. I started the coffee maker, my high-end espresso machine that sat proudly on my counter. Around 2 in the afternoon, my buzzer rang. It was Sarah from down the hall, and Talia, and a few other friends I had made in my new life. They brought wine. They brought pies. I had roasted a chicken because a 14-pound turkey seemed excessive for a group of friends who just wanted to laugh. We sat around my dining table. The city spread out below us. We ate. We told stories. We laughed until our sides hurt. No one asked me to refill their glass. No one made me feel small. No one cropped me out of the photo. At one point, I stepped away from the table and walked to the window. I looked out at the snow falling gently on Denver. The silence of my old life was the silence of abandonment. It was a vacuum where love should have been. But as I listened to the laughter of my friends behind me and felt the warmth of the cup in my hand, I realized that the silence I had woken up to this morning was different. It was the silence of peace. It was the silence of ownership. It was the silence of freedom. I raised my glass to the reflection in the window. "Happy Thanksgiving, Harper," I whispered. And for the first time, I really meant it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts on what Harper did. Make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button so this story can reach more people.